トビデオ
Oh boy, have I had quite a workload lately. This month and a half has had me producing videos that have required a great deal of research considering I chose such vast and heavy topics, and this is on top of producing an episode for that Looney Tunes miniseries I hope to finish one of these days. And considering I made those videos all while preparing and executing a big move to a new place, I feel like I have earned myself a little vacay. And by vacay, I actually mean making a video that I don't have to do nearly as much work on as I have to do for other videos. Now, this is around the time where I would be putting out my annual video about a fighting game adaptation to coincide with EVO. That's still gonna happen, but like Usher, I need to make a confession. I could have easily done a video about an actual good fighting game adaptation like Street Fighter the Animated Movie or one of the Fatal Fury specials, or even something way out there and interesting like Voltage Fighter Gao Kaiser.
I am the ghost of the one who was beaten to death by you in a karate match.
But, as I said before, I want to take it easy this round. So because I want to make a video that requires a very little effort on my part, it was only appropriate that I choose a subject that also had very little effort put into it. Our kindling this episode centers around two unlikely karate experts, dojo owner Ryo Sakazaki and rich millionaire playboy Robert Garcia. While chasing a cat, no, really.
Get ready. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Oh, great!
The two martial artists end up becoming unwilling witnesses to a murder related to a stolen diamond. They end up fighting off the murderous mobsters, but in the process attract the attention of notorious local crime boss, Mr. Big. The obviously named mobster believes that Ryo and Garcia are the ones who have the diamond and kidnaps Ryo's sister Yuri to use as a bargaining chip in exchange for the valuable gemstone that our two heroes do not have.
Man, what a mess. We don't know anything about the Sirius.
Will our heroes be able to rescue Yuri from the clutches of Mr. Big and his cronies? Will they find the diamond they need in order to save her? And will they get in some satisfactory karate practice along the way? Well, whatever happens in this anime, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's gonna look really stupid. See what I mean? There are bad adaptations of fighting games, and then there's Art of Fighting. This was an attempt by SNK to make lightning strike twice with the success of the Fatal Fury TV specials by making another, cheaper TV special as a way to promote their secondary franchise of the same name. And if you've been sticking around this channel for a while, you know that this won't be the last time.
Are you ready? Ready to die, Hamaru?
But the differences between the bad Samurai Showdown anime and the bad Art of Fighting anime is that the Samurai Showdown anime has rightfully faded away into history as just another regrettable piece of the franchise that can be swept under the rug. Art of Fighting, on the other hand, has a small bit of infamy surrounding it. If you ask someone to rank a list of the worst fighting game adaptations, which would be understood as quite a feat, Art of Fighting would be near the top. It's usually not a good sign when, in the limited information about this anime that you can find on Wikipedia, a solid paragraph of information on the anime is devoted to how people saw it as stupid, idiotic, and plotting. And that's good news for me. The reason why critics, media analysts, and screamy guys in front of cameras mostly choose to talk about bad movies is because it's easier. I, on the other hand, like to give myself a challenge and try to talk about more positive and interesting things that require more research and a lot more thought put into it on my part. It's just a more rewarding experience. But sometimes, you gotta pick the low-hanging fruit in order to really recharge those batteries of yours. I don't do it often, but sometimes I just need to kick back, relax, and take a double-barrel shotgun to the barrel of fish that is sitting right in front of me. But before we engage in the most classic of ichthyology-based idioms, we do need to talk about what exactly is Art of Fighting. It's well established that the success of Capcom's Street Fighter II kicked off the golden age of arcade fighters as many companies rushed to build their own fighters so that they may get the chance to knock the king from his throne. It's also well established that Capcom's biggest and most storied rival in this competition, at least in Japan, was the company SNK. SNK were quick to establish themselves as the true innovators of the nascent fighting game genre. By making multiple fighting game franchises, the company strove to always keep the genre fresh and to break new ground. One of these games was Art of Fighting. Released in 1992, Art of Fighting does appear to look a lot like a knockoff Street Fighter, especially in a time period where Street Fighter knockoffs were being passed around like candy. But in actuality, Art of Fighting is yet another example of SNK innovating the fighting game genre. For one thing, the game was one of the first fighting games to utilize dashing and the concept of super moves, here called desperation moves as they could only be used if your health was low. You also had special moves, but they could only be executed a finite number of times judging by how much of your meter you had, and performing a super meant depleting most of it. Not only that, but the game also made use of taunting as a mechanic by having it deplete a portion of your opponent's meter. It's a quite in-depth fighting game that would later lay the foundation for future innovations in the genre. With that said, it wasn't perfect. Many people complained that you could only play as Ryo and Robert in single player, with most of the roster locked away in the multiplayer mode. A baffling decision and direction, as it made it impossible to really train and get good at any other fighters that were not Robert and Ryo. And the story was also notoriously goofy, even by fighting game standards. What begins as a simple rescuing your sister from a dangerous crime boss storyline ends up getting downright absurd when the true bad guy of the story shows up, a masked man by the name of Mr. Karate. And once Ryo actually defeats Mr. Karate, his sister Yuri holds him back and says that Mr. Karate is actually their father. But as flawed as it was, Art of Fighting's current state allowed it to be a template that could be improved on. And improve SNK did with Art of Fighting 2. Continuing immediately where the last game left off, the sequel is considerably even better than the first, with a far more refined gameplay, expanded roster, which included Yuri, and one of the most difficult final bosses in fighting game history in the form of a young Geese Howard. Yeah, I forgot to mention that Art of Fighting is a prequel to the Fatal Fury series. But the most striking selling point was the graphics. SNK always prided themselves on their sprite work, and this is considered some of their best work in that area. Every background gives a plot that's mostly centered around fighting in the streets this impressive sense of scale. Combined with the reflecting lights and flickering neon in most of the scenes, it really sets the game's mood of being this late 70s, early 80s martial arts romps in the big friggin' city. And yet, even with all this praise and innovation, it seemed like the franchise never got the respect it deserved. Art of Fighting was often maligned, even by other SNK fans, as just being too standard in the way they designed their characters when compared to other fighting games. And even if they weren't trying to be a Street Fighter ripoff, it didn't help that that was a lot of people's first impression of the game, both from outside the video game industry and from within. When Capcom released Street Fighter Alpha in 1995, they introduced one of the most famous joke characters in fighting games, Dan Hibiki. A character who was made the lowest of low tiers via his nerfed moveset, Dan's character as a whole is just a relentless skewering of Art of Fighting. His whole design is just Robert's head attached to Ryo's body, and his ending is just a full-blown parody of Art of Fighting's canonical ending. SNK really tried to prove the haters wrong and take it to the limit with Art of Fighting 3, which is known for its even more impressive sprite work that appears to emulate 3D graphics on a 2D plane. Alas, the game failed, partially because actual 3D fighters were taking over, and because SNK has spent so much time perfecting the sprites that they had completely forgotten to balance the game. The end product is one of the most visually impressive busted-ass poverty games.
A lot of time and money, I would guess, put into the sprites being a really high quality.
Sadly, it all went into an Art of Fighting game, but...
Oh no, because the Art of Fighting games,
like, I respect the series, but like...
You have to respect it, but you don't have to play it.
Yeah.
And with that, the Art of Fighting franchise ended. Most of the characters have gone on to be immortalized in the King of Fighters franchise, where characters like Ryo, Robert, Yuri, King, and Kazumi Toto remain as regulars. But looking at years of hindsight, it definitely feels like the ultimate fate of the Art of Fighting franchise was just to be another stepping stone towards the far more popular King of Fighters franchise. And to be honest, it was an inevitability. While the Art of Fighting games sold well, they weren't exactly blockbusters in the way the Fatal Fury or even the Samurai Showdown games were. Knowing this, I think this is why SNK felt compelled in 1993 to commission an anime special to build hype for the upcoming Art of Fighting 2. But if that was the case, you'd think that would incentivize the studio to try harder than this. The reason why Art of Fighting has this small amount of notoriety behind it is that it is just so bad that it almost exists as a defining example of how not to make a fighting game adaptation. Firstly, everything this anime is visually feels incredibly half-hearted. It's as if there was a plan initially to actually capture the gritty inner city vibes of Art of Fighting, but it feels like those ideas got scuttled halfway through in the interest of getting this anime done as fast as possible. Even discounting that this is early 90s footage that hasn't yet been remastered and probably never will be, this is a very boring film from an art direction perspective. There's a lot of focus on how the setting is the Big Apple in the old concrete jungle days before it actually became the world's largest tourist trap that no one actually lives in. But it never goes beyond panning across skyscrapers. There's no attempt to give the city a vibrant, neon-soaked life to it that hides a seedy underbelly like in the games. And it's especially strange considering art director Junichiro Nishikawa has gone on to do much better work elsewhere. Character designs, meanwhile, are all over the place. Sometimes it'll be just like the games like Yuri and Mr. Big. Sometimes they'll actually build on designs like they did with King, really emphasize the stony femme fatale image she projects in the first game. But then you have the designs of our two main leads, which are just goofy. Not only is the coloring wrong in some cases, with the most egregious example changing Rio from a blonde to a brunette, thereby robbing him of an important contrast between him and Robert, but their designs comes off as a little too exaggerated compared to everyone else. Robert Garcia is already 2 years ahead of Capcom by already looking like Dan Hibiki in this anime. But the thing that really sticks itself in my craw with this anime is the fight scenes. Fight scenes are such a cornerstone of the fighting game adaptation that if you're gonna go in half-assed with it, you might as well just throw the whole thing out. The art of the fight scenes in Art of Fighting is really unique on how it botches its execution. It appears that the animators understand what goes into making a good fight scene, but never nails down how those elements come together to actually make a good fight scene. They understand that your characters need to be animated smoothly, but they do it in such a way that there is no weight to any of the characters or the punches they are throwing. This saps the fight scenes of any sort of power or tension they might have had. This is aggravated by some of the shots and poses being boarded in such a flat and uninspired manner, combined with the editing occasionally making the choreography hard to follow with its choppy cutting. It's bad fight scene animation that is almost begging to be studied through its awfulness.
Die! Robert, how you doing in there?
In the interest of not making this video a complete journey into the negative zone, there are some things I did like about the anime's presentation. For one thing, I think the anime does have a good soundtrack. This is the one area of the anime where SNK had the most involvement by loaning their sound team, and it really shows by having the soundtrack be this cool jazzscape that paints a picture of the big city. And while obviously unintentional on the part of Central Park Media, I would also say the dub is a point in this anime's favor, if only because it's just the right amount of unintentionally hilarious that makes watching the anime bearable. It's the perfect classic bad anime dub, with the producers being more focused on matching the lip flaps than they do having their actors deliver a good performance, which gives out such a goldmine of clips that I'm shocked haven't been used for an out-of-context Twitter account yet.
What's wrong, Rio? Not too busy with the karate dojo? Dojo!
Oh man, I think serious means shining thing in Greek.
Hey, Romeo. Don't forget she's the enemy. Look!
As for the story, you'd think the staff would be able to pull together something worthy of a 45-minute runtime. The original game's story, despite descending into Wacky Town near the end, is still a simple avenue for some potential fight scenes through the plot involving two heroes fighting through a series of quirky martial artists to save the damsel in distress. You don't really need to make this more complicated, but just like with Samurai Showdown, the anime producers decided to go, no, but what if we did this though? So you get this plot where Rio and Robert end up becoming unwitting patsies to a jewelry heist, and that ends up being the reason why Yuri gets kidnapped by Mr. Big in the first place. The reason why this unnecessary element is added is because the anime removes the character of Mr. Karate. The reason why Yuri is kidnapped in the game in the first place is because Mr. Karate, actually named Takumi Sakazaki, was Mr. Big's enforcer who tried to voluntarily leave the criminal lifestyle, and Mr. Big kidnapped his daughter as blackmail to pull him right back in. I can understand why they did this, while some might say that this is because the producers wanted to ground the anime by removing the screaming guy in the Tengu mask named Mr. Karate from their gritty urban martial arts anime. The most likely explanation is because a lot of what I mentioned above is explained in the sequel. And since this anime is meant to build hype for said sequel that will be coming out next year, it's understandable why such elements that give away its story were removed. But what actually makes this stolen diamond plot bad is its execution. The diamond isn't this Sakazaki family heirloom or part of the Garcia treasury. No, that would actually establish stakes. It's instead something that Mr. Big's goons stole a few days prior, and something Mr. Big assumes that our two heroes have in their possession because they stumbled across and beat up said goons. But for most of the anime, Rio and Robert do not have the diamond on them and have zero clue that it's Mr. Big who wants the diamond in exchange for Yuri. It only takes until halfway through the anime when they fail at rescuing Yuri at Mr. Big's casino and Mr. Big flies off telling them to actually bring the diamond to them if they want to see Yuri again that our two heroes figure out that, hey, we better go find that diamond. And that's my other big issue with this anime, is that despite having an important person in both their lives kidnapped by a dangerous criminal kingpin, it feels like Rio and Robert are in no real hurry to rescue Yuri at any point in this anime. Some of this is due to the anime's atrocious pacing. Just the first quarter of this anime, when it's not centered around an unfunny cat set piece straight out of a Harold Lloyd picture, is built on establishing our two mains through some of the most laughably ham-fisted exposition.
Plus, I'm a good-looking guy, and if me and Yuri make it to the altar, and the entire Garcia Foundation becomes ours, then we might be able to buy you a pair of shoes.
Exposition that they deign to repeat to us 5 minutes later.
One is Robert Garcia, heir to the Garcia Foundation.
But most of this anime's problem can be found in the characterization of Rio and Robert. In the first game, they didn't have much in the way of set personalities, but you could at least tell that they were heroic and driven with how much they were willing to tear through street fight after street fight in the quest to save Rio's sister. But here, they're just complete hapless dumbasses who don't even really seem to register the gravity of Yuri's situation. Rio feels like he's more concerned about paying his power bill than saving his sister, and Robert is just this arrogant Johnny Bravo whose main goal in the mission is to just get King's digits. When he arrives at Mr. Big's hideout, instead of actually taking the mission seriously and scoping the area for any clues of Yuri's whereabouts, he just goes to make kizzy faces in the nearest mirror.
Robert, wait!
He can't hear you.
And I know what you're thinking, and I'm just gonna stop you right here. This isn't himbo behavior. This is just dumbass behavior, and it prevents me from feeling even the least bit engaged in this anime. Nothing much else to say on the rest of the cast. They're just painted as your average band of villainous henchmen, though they do something weird with Toto by changing him from the old-fashioned dojo owner in the first game to an Inspector Zenigata type, complete with an endless horde of police officers, which I guess you would call inspired?
Where's the Eye of Sirius anyway? Huh? Look for it! Everybody in the pool!
I was like, I thought, no, it's dumb. Just like everything else in this anime. The animation, dumb. The plot, dumb. The characters, dumb. This whole anime is just dumb. It's clear that Art of Fighting was just a project that was meant to be banged out in a short time period. Any ambition that this anime could have had was dumped in favor of rushing it to a deadline. Sucks that Art of Fighting had to be saddled with one of anime's worst fighting game adaptations when it was already the Rodney Dangerfield of the arcade fighters. This anime is part of a legacy that includes a hilariously unbalanced third installment and the joke character who set the template for other fighting game joke characters. Art of Fighting deserved better. Rio, Robert, and the rest of the cast still have King of Fighters to fall back on, but they should have gotten their due back when they had their own series. They should have gotten an anime that didn't play into people's expectations that they were nothing but cheap jokes.